episode of Unlock the Door Radio on UCY TV. Tonight, we have a really interesting guest. We're going to be speaking with Jay Weidner. I pronounced that right, correct?
Yes, you did.
Excellent. And Jay is an author and researcher. He recently has been on a lot of interviews over his book, Kubrick's Odyssey, which goes into Stanley Kubrick's messages that he, I guess, has hidden in a lot of his movies. And being a Kubrick fan, I can see a lot of those things in those films. But tonight, I'd like to deal with more esoteric knowledge and so forth. And Jay, I just wanted to ask you. I just recently saw the Noah movie, the one with Russell Crowe.
Yep.
And I was wondering, in the movie, it's presented that Noah, of course, is saving the world because humans have destroyed it, and I guess you could say that at the very beginning, it says that there's been an industrial movement, and we see throughout the film kind of a very primitive, maybe 1890s industry depicted as the society of Noah's day, which of course goes against the whole Noah being some farmer out in the middle of nowhere dressed in some sort of Middle Eastern garb. But is this maybe something more accurate of what it was like, or is human history different than what we see? Is it something that's more of it's gone up and down, and maybe there's been time periods where human society has been more advanced than it is today?
Well, yeah, I do believe that. The texts from India, the Mahabharata and the Purana texts from India, which go back thousands and thousands of years, say, that there was extremely advanced civilization thousands of years ago. It had flying vehicles named Vimanacraft, and there's even evidence in, I think it's Libya, of a nuclear explosion. There's a rounded glass, which was what happens to sand when it gets melted by nuclear weapons. And we know there's the Baghdad battery, which is about a fully functional battery, which is about 4,000 years old. There's all sorts of little things that we found that would seem to indicate that humanity has been here for a lot longer than we have been previously led to believe.
Okay, well, a lot of times, like on History Channel, you'll have those explained by the whole ancient alien concept, and I've often wondered, the idea could be that there have been civilizations, human, like you and me, but maybe time periods where, you had more advancement, and these so-called aliens or whatever could actually be from our world, but that they still hold on to some of this technology and maybe left. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I think I think that there's a lot of serious truth behind this idea that the aliens might be us. I believe one of the reasons that NASA was put together was because they believed that they were going to find evidence of previous human civilizations out on other planets and the moon. And in fact, I believe they found that evidence, and they're trying to find a way to tell us about it. And so, yeah, I think that it's very clear evidence. We know that the finding in Turkey by the German archaeologist Göbekli Tepe, which is a city in Turkey, has been carbon dated to 12,000 years, and it's an advanced city too. So here we now have, we've bumped history back 7,000 years in just the last couple of years with that discovery. And I think you're going to find a lot more discoveries. Graham Hancock has postulated that we're looking in the wrong places, that if you really want to find former advanced cities and civilizations, you have to look at where the coastal areas were before the last ice age melted. and so he's kind of advocating that we look out, when we reduce the volume of the oceans by a couple hundred feet, and we have a lot more land available, and I think we would find like cities and things out there in the former coastal areas of the world.
Yeah, I wrote, I do fiction writing and so forth. I recently did sci-fi, in which I haven't got it published yet. I haven't really tried, but speculating that the whole Atlantean era was actually something that was passed down from Noah's era, that you may have had a cataclysm that hit the earth, and there were more survivors, of course, than Noah, but that was maybe the last vestige of this particular advanced society. But essentially, if you look at some of these books, I mean, later, after I finished the book, people told me, oh, you should look at the book of Enoch and Jasher and so forth. And it seems that these books that were like banned from the Bible speak of a more advanced civilization, playing around with genetic engineering.
Oh, definitely. I think the Book of Enoch is one of the more eye-opening books ever written, and it definitely tells the story of these, like, I don't know what you want to call them, aliens that Enoch has to lock up in a tomb and put under a lake to save the earth from these evil aliens, and the church, of course, banned it from the Bible, like you say, and you got to wonder why. It seems like it's telling a story that needs to be told, and so I say that if it's banned from the Bible, it's probably extremely important.
Well, I think it's fascinating, the whole idea that, I mean, traditionally what you learn in Sunday school is that God got angry at people for being naughty, wicked, whatever, and then he destroyed the planet. But then if you look at these other books, it seems that there was something more profound, and then it starts to make sense. I mean, if you had genetic engineering, for instance, that had messed up the entire genome, then you would have to start over. Versus, well, I mean, if it was just that people were bad, he could have just given Noah's family some sort of immunity to a disease and been much less cataclysm involved.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, and we don't really we have amnesia. I think it was Velikovsky who said that we suffer from some kind of catastrophe. My first two books are about the Cross of Henday, which describes a periodic explosion coming from the sun every few thousand years, wiping out all life on Earth. And the Indian texts talk about it too. And now we know, when I first wrote my books in the 90s, everyone said, "Oh, you're crazy. That's not. You don't have to worry about that." But then after a while, NASA started, talking about the fact that this really could be a problem here with the solar flare knocking out all the electricity on Earth. And so now we've come to grips with this idea that we can be wiped out in a moment. And so if we can be wiped out in a moment and go back to 4th century BC, in 20 minutes, which could easily happen, then yeah, anything is possible once you understand that. Science is beginning to, I think, finally change its attitude and is starting to accept that we might have been around a little bit longer than they previously thought.
Now, a lot of people, I mean, my understanding is some sort of cataclysm hit around 12,500 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay, could that be, for instance, when the flood would have taken place? I mean,
yeah, I think that there's no doubt there was a flood. So you have to ask yourself, okay, so what happened? Well, you have the poles getting more and more ice build up over an ice age, right? And then it begins to warm up. But the ice doesn't melt uniformly. What happens is that the surface of the glaciers the top surface of it will melt, and then it'll form what they call glacier lakes. And so what happens is that finally there's a big enough warm-up where the ice dams begin melting, and then you have literally torrents of water pouring through these ice dams that's been melting for thousands of years. We know this happened in Washington State. The entire Columbia River Basin was carved out by 12,000 years ago by this tremendous flood. And I think that when the Ice Age ended, waves and waves of water poured down on the whole planet and raised the sea levels by 150, 200 feet. And, you can just imagine what this did. And so, yeah, and I just think we have to rethink it. Science agrees that there was this Ice Age ended 12,000 years ago, but what they don't agree on is that there could possibly have been a civilization previous to that. But fortunately, Göbekli Tepe is proving that wrong, and I suspect there's going to be other discoveries as we go on here.
Well, isn't there, I don't remember what city it is, but there's some city in the Andes in which it's very advanced, very intricate, but yet it's the line it has for the equinox. With a lot of these civilizations would usher in the spring, its line is off. Everything's perfect except its line is off unless you take it back about 10, 15,000 years.
Yeah, you're talking about Polanski's work in Bolivia. Exactly. The whole city there in Bolivia was built probably about 15,000 years ago. It's the only way that it makes sense. And so, and again, science is just they accepted this gradualism theory, and they can't break free of it. Yet they acknowledge, slowly that the universe outside the Earth is actually a very dangerous place with asteroids bouncing around like billiard balls, and the sun not nearly being as stable a sun as they previously thought. So the idea that there isn't a catastrophe coming is ridiculous. It's just when, it's not if.
Okay, you speculate, or correct me if I'm wrong, you speculate that some people have, we got Noah and the boat, he escapes the whatever catastrophe, but that other people, other civilizations may have had people that escaped as well.
Yeah, they had. What we were just talking about in South America, they claim that they went into caves and that it was so hot that you could stick a stick out the door of the cave and the stick would light on fire. And then they came out and they reconquered the land. Same thing in the Pacific Northwest with the Sumamish Indians. They have the same exact kind of story where they escaped into caves. And these are all over the world, these stories. Siberia, Turkey, Africa. And so what I think happened is that each separate race, Africans, Europeans, Asians, are people who survived, and then, they came out and started it up again. And again, Graham Hancock in his book, Fingerprints of the Gods, talks about, the myth that all these tribal people have of a group coming in boats and teaching them how to read and write and do agriculture, and this was, after a catastrophe had decimated the earth.
And again, that could be the idea that perhaps, and again, I'm just using this as an example, that Noah could have been the last survivor of the more advanced group. Yeah,
probably. Because boat building is an advanced thing. So I would think that, Noah was probably part of this group. He maybe was exactly what the story says. He was warned by one of the gods, who are probably just these advanced aliens or advanced humans, because they felt sorry for us. and he built the boat and saved a bunch of animals. Maybe he didn't even really save animals. It was just the genetic strains that he was saving. It'd be a lot easier. And so yeah, I actually think that the story of Noah also comes from several civilizations. Have the story of the guy who saves everybody in a boat from a catastrophe.
And then, of course, isn't there an Indian tradition that there were some that escaped to Mars or something?
Yeah, there's the Puranas tell a story of that a group long time ago decided that they wanted to escape the disaster coming from the periodic blasting out of the sun, and they literally say they built arks, and they went to a planet called Mahar, which is very close to Mars, and they waited it out and came back later. It says that they actually went to another planet. And so here we have ancient texts that not only are saying this, but they know that there's planets and what planets are, and that you can go to planets. And it's a different version of the reality of our past than we've been given. We've been told that people were just dumb, brutish cavemen and didn't know anything. But here, we have texts telling us that they built arks in outer space and went to another planet.
Yeah, well, the Sumerians had depictions of the solar system.
Yeah, exactly. Look at the Sumerians. Look at their kings list. With kings that lived 400 or 500 years old. Is that real? Well, it just might be.
Well, I mean, with nanotechnology, the thing is, a lot of times people will look at these things like, well, Noah lived to be 900 years old, and they think, well, that was just playing around with literature and making the stuff up. But it's only been in the last, I would say, 10 years that scientists are now talking about those kinds of lifespans being possible in the near future.
Absolutely, and if you don't smoke and you wear seat belts and drink plenty of water, you have a really good chance of living to be over 100 years old now.
Yeah, and with nanotechnology, maybe 1,000 if you're lucky enough to make it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think these things are all you got to take anything that the experts are selling you with a huge grain of salt, because I don't buy a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of experts, I wanted to kind of deal with this here. The one thing I threw into my book, and I think it may be symbolic of what things are really like, is a stratified society in which one is very super spiritualistic and the other one's just the regular people. You actually attack religion, and it's just kept as a ritual. And I'm just wondering, are the people who you could call the elite, do they have a connection to this kind of stuff you're talking about, or is this just something you just find on the internet? I mean, what I'm trying to say is, what seems to be the traditions amongst the people we would call our elite or rulers today, as opposed to what is out there amongst the masses?
Well, I think that the elites are they practice the occult, and they use magic and sorcery to get what they want, and the rest of the people, they just want to live their lives. They don't want to run the world. They don't want to do nasty things to each other. And so their religion is usually a much simpler version where they don't try to manipulate reality. The religions, or the occult religions of the elites, are all based on mind control and how to create a dictatorship on Earth and how to keep the populations reduced and all that. Whereas, the people like you and I, we just have simple lives, and we don't understand why anyone would want to, manipulate people and use sorcery on them. And so I think, it's a very serious problem that we're having.
Well, I've gotten hit with this question from a lot of people when they start searching the internet. They start finding lots of stuff, symbols, and then they start looking into things like, again, secret societies and so forth, Bohemian Grove, Illuminati, Skull and Bones, all these kinds of organizations. And what do you think ties that all together? Is this kind of a network where people get together in a dark room, or is it more of kind of a movement once you reach a certain level? It seems like with Stanley Kubrick, the way he dealt with it was it seemed somewhat loose-knit, but they were all connected in a sense. In Eyes Wide Shut, the movie Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah. Well, they did a study, Swiss Academy did a study in 2007. They wanted to find out if conspiracy theorists were right. And so what they did was they examined all of the boards of directors of all the major corporations on Earth. And they came down to the realization that actually only 146 corporations rule the entire world. And out of those 146 corporations, there's really only about 85 people that ruled 90% of the world. And so it's done through the loose affiliation of interlocking directorships, of which the same guy will serve on the board of directors of 40 or 50 different corporations. And so he can provide that interlocking that's necessary for the conspiracy to take place. So it's not really all that hard to believe. The Swiss study, I think his name is Gasterfelder or something like that. You can look it up. Look up 2007 Swiss study, 146 corporations rule the world, and you'll see. So it's already been proven. There's no doubt in anybody's mind that corporations are a conspiracy. I mean, they are. That's what they do. And, conspiracy is not something to shy away from. Most of Shakespeare's greatest plays were all conspiracies. The Declaration of Independence is just one long conspiracy theory. So, I mean, it's not something that people in the past thought was, something that didn't happen. They very much, our founding fathers very much thought that there were conspiracies.
Well, I mean, if you look at like what the CIA does when they deal with espionage, or in the old days the KGB, I mean, it was all planting stories and interlocking people and then pulling off something like the overthrow of the Iranian government in the 50s. That was an example of a really, it was a very intricate conspiracy set up by the CIA.
Oh, absolutely. That was just the beginning of the CIA's many overthrows, one after another, and and it's just it's actually outrageous that the CIA has been allowed to do what they do, and they're being kicked out of Germany right now because Germany's figured it out. And, the great thing about the Internet is we're all beginning to figure everything out all at the same time, which is, really a wonderful thing.
Yeah, as long as people don't spend all their time looking at kitty cat pictures and stuff like that.
And porn.
Yeah. Do you think, I just got to throw this out at you, do you think that a lot of the games that we have now, this is totally different, off subject maybe, but a lot of the games, the legalization of pornography, a lot of the distractions that are out there now, that they actually may have had more of a sinister purpose, that it's to keep people occupied in things that are transitory, that have no meaning, but will keep the masses going. Like Orwell said something about sports and beer is all that you needed to keep the proletariat in line. Yeah,
no, I totally agree with that. And, bread and circus is what the Romans used, and I think that's what they do. And I believe that's super Coliseum sports, drugs, pornography, movies, television, all these things are designed to put you into a helpless state. Fear is the business model. And as long as you're in a constant state of fear, then you're going to be, fear is very close to, causes same kind of physical reactions as sex. And so they keep you in a kind of a constant state of titillation. You're distracted, and then you're also too exhausted to do much. So it's a very interesting thing.
Which explains how the network news makes so much money. I mean, they give very simple news stories that usually are heavily doctored by the government. And then when you think the world's pretty much on the end, they give you all these great products you can buy.
Yeah, because the whole point is just to sell products. And so, you know, it's a situation where we're kind of caught, and so I suggest you don't watch television. I don't. And, you know, you stay away from the media. Don't get any of my news from regular media outlets. I get my news from alternative media outlets. I make sure I check stories left, right, and center to make sure that I'm not getting a skewed story. And I believe that we are creating a new media that is going to overthrow the old media, and which it's doing right now, because the new media is actually more reliable than the old media, and then that's going to subsequently cause a political overthrow, and then the power structures will be overthrown.
Well, absolutely. If you just relied on the normal media, I mean, it's so simplistic and distorted and lots of lies. Like, for instance, we look at Ukraine. What's left out is what's important. The media does not report anything, really, about what's going on.
People are so abysmally ignorant about what's going on over there that, I was just talking to a woman yesterday. You know that Putin invaded Ukraine. I'm like, Putin never invaded Ukraine. What are you talking about? You know, it's like they don't even have any idea what is really going on. They don't realize that it was, in fact, American neocons who put the guy in power and overthrew the democratically elected president of Ukraine, and in an effort to surround Putin and to pressure him. Mm-hmm. But nobody understands that, because people don't understand politics. They don't understand the reality around them, and it's enough to make you get sick sometimes.
Okay, yeah, tell me about it. You know, I know you're limited in your time there. You said about 30 minutes. So I'm just wondering, one last thing. If you had to put your finger on what is the ultimate destiny that, for instance, the elite have in regards to long-term plans. I mean, every organization has a vision statement. Every organization says this is what we want in the future. I've heard a lot of things. I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff out there about population and things like that and so forth. What do you think the elite's final plan is for society? What do you think they envision 100 years from now?
Well, there's two things. They have a plan which they think they're going to achieve, and they think they're working towards that achievement. But what they don't realize is that they're actually executing a plan for another entity that they know exists, but don't really think it has all that much power. So I'll describe you what they think the world they're building, and then I'll describe you the actual world that they're going to build. So the world they think they're building is going to be a world where generally people all of the same race will, very few of them, maybe 200 or 300 million, with 200 or 300 million servants, and they will live in a kind of a quasi wealthy country kind of existence, flying around the world in their jets and going to parties and letting the wilderness go back to wilderness and all that. That's the world they think they're building. Now, the world that's actually going to happen is going to be a world where everybody will be watched, everybody will be cataloged, everyone will be decided what they're going to be by the time they're 5 years old. People will be put into gigantic concentrations of schools. There will be no one going out into nature. Everyone will be jammed in cities, high rises where you'll probably stay in the same building your whole life. And it'll be a cyber fascist state ruled by a dictator. That's the one that's going to really happen.
It sounds more like the Hunger Games then.
Yeah, that's why they're doing the Hunger Games, getting us ready for it. By the way, Hunger Games 2 is a really good movie.
Yeah, I've seen number 1 and 2. I'll see number 3 here, but I'm just wondering, that doesn't sound like any kind of utopia. It sounds like a utopia for a small number, but not a utopia for the rest of society.
No, they have no intentions. They hate us, and are doing everything they can to get rid of us. This is a racial group. They believe that they're going to inherit the world, and it's Darwinism. It's at its worst, and and they want to basically kill us all off. Basically.
Well, I mean, it seems the policies they have in the media and so forth have really dissuaded a lot of people from even having kids. I mean, most of Europe, the average woman has only like one child.
Oh yeah, there's a demographic nightmare going on that's true. It's going to be really ugly.
Yeah, but when the media always promotes this kind of materialistic glitz and so forth, then it's not surprising. I mean, it's a soft kill, essentially.
No, I totally agree with you. Totally.
Okay. Well, anyway, hey, thanks for coming on. And what's your website? I want people to come and visit. You have a lot of interesting stuff there.
Yeah, you can go if you want to read my free articles. It's jweidner.com, jayweidner.com. And then the website to get my films is sacredmysteries.com.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing all this information with us tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay, you take care now. Hello there. And again, welcome to the second half of our show. What I'd like to do, actually, is go over some of the points that Mr. Weidner, Jay Weidner, brought up. And I'd like to really focus more on the whole Noah thing again. And the reason for that, and I'm going to take it more into maybe a religious standpoint, and I'm going to mix some religion and maybe some conjecture and science and all that kind of stuff together. Again, I guess there's really no real barrier between all these things, though. I mean, I think society today creates artificial barriers between spirituality, history, religion, science, and all these things. So, what I'd like to do here is make a quote from the Bible, and it's Luke 17:26. And it states, "Just as it was in the days of Noah, so also will it be in the days of the Son of Man," in reference to Jesus returning to earth. Now, what I would like to ask is this: what are the prerequisites for that? I mean, if we look at the Bible, we merely get we'll get a really brief description. If you consider this was a destruction of humanity, millions and millions of people wiped out. Now, I say millions because ultimately I've watched some documentaries on the Old Testament, and it was, lots of scholars that have studied that have said that the population of the earth at that time, at least in conjecture again, would probably be around 35 or more million people. So I think sometimes people get hooked up on those genealogies. And like I pointed out with the interview with Mr. Weidner, The thing is that let's pretend like we're talking about kings and queens of England. Do we mention every one of them if we have just an abbreviated history course? If I'm supposed to teach a group of, let's say, high schoolers about the royalty in England, I'm not going to mention all the ones that really didn't amount to very much or were in power when things were really stable. I might throw in Henry VIII. I might throw in, let's say, Queen Victoria, Elizabeth, those kind. But the ones in between are going to be left out. Now, if we're talking about a very abbreviated text, and I think that the book of Genesis is extremely abbreviated. Come on, the whole thing about the 6 days and 6 nights of creating the world. We know that it was longer. We know that the actual translation of days is actually eons. So, again, you got one or two verses talking about what might have been 100 million years. So a lot of stuff is left out. So it could be, and this is speculation, it could be that when we look at these genealogies in the Old Testament where it goes to Adam and then he begets these guys and they beget these guys, for all we know, these were separated by periods. It'd be like if we said something about, and Henry VIII beget Queen Victoria. Well, he didn't really, but it would mean the line. And maybe you only used the people that were the most important in these genealogies, which could have meant that maybe it wasn't a literal this person beget this person, but it might be that was in their family line that they came about, which of course would explain the whole thing about the world's 6,000 years old. Well, that's kind of difficult if we know that there's civilizations that have had their presence on the earth for 6,000 or more years. It would be very difficult then, unless we go by the concept that maybe God reused a planet. These people were erased, and then God decided to use this planet again for Adam and Eve. I don't think that's really going to be something that's going to hold up. So I think that the genealogy thing about the begets and begets is probably dealing with family lines rather than literal, this person is this person's father, or so forth. We don't get a mention of mothers, unfortunately, except for Eve, and then for some reason we forget all about women until we get to Moses, or at least Egypt. So anyway, I should correct that. We do get women mentioned with Abraham, but again, the period between Noah and Abraham, probably a very, very long time. Now, if we take a look at this about Jesus is supposed to come back when things are like they were in the days of Noah, well, you can read into that there was violence in the days of Noah, so God came back, or like the book of Jasher goes into more detail, that there was unbelief. If you go by the Muslim ideas, the people were idol worshippers. So no matter what, we're talking about a behavior that's associated with the destruction of humanity. The problem is that people have been pretty nasty to each other and doing wicked things throughout history. Okay? Where there's been countless situations. I mean, the Romans did quite a bit of attacking and destroying massive numbers of people, hundreds of thousands. In Israel, millions, when they finally destroyed Israel. You had many wars that have resulted in millions upon millions upon millions of deaths. You've had some really crazy communist dictators that have killed millions and millions of people. But yet, Jesus didn't come back. Now, of course, to the skeptic, that means he's not coming back. He's a figment of someone's imagination. But if we take a look at some of the weird stuff that we have going on in, well, Genesis, but also the book of Enoch. There's a few other books. The book of Jasher. Now, I should note, Jasher is quoted in the Bible. There is references made to the book of Jasher. So it must have been authoritative text. This must have been something that people assumed, prophets assumed, was Scripture. It was left out for some reason, as was the book of Enoch. Except, well, the book of Enoch is actually used by the Coptics, who did not get the Catholic influence. So in Ethiopia, there's like, 10, 15 million people who do read the book of Enoch when they read the Bible. So anyway, now, if we look at Jasher, though, we get some weird stuff about, one, the Nephilim. And I'm going to propose a different explanation for the Nephilim here in just a moment. The alien explanation is that aliens came down, had sex with humans, and made babies. And these were the Nephilim. There are some biblical literalists who believe that angels came down, had sex with human women. This created a mixed race, divine/human. That's kind of problematic if we consider if Jesus' father, that Jesus' DNA from his father was the same thing, divine, then does that make Jesus a Nephilim? I mean, if you go by that definition. And then there's another explanation, which I'll go into in just a moment. But if we take a look at the book of Jasher, it says the sons of men were taught how to mix one species with another species, and that provoked God, and that is what finally led to the destruction. Now, the other thing was that the Nephilim, these guys were hot, and human women just wanted them and to have babies with them and that sort of thing. There was something special about them. They didn't, I watched the Noah movie a while back. I just don't get the idea that too many women would want to be mixing with the Nephilim as they were presented in that movie. I mean, they look like the rock creatures that were in the mountains on the Hobbit. They look like some sort of rock/transformer or something like that. Not something you really want to cuddle up next to, okay? But for some reason, in the Bible, we also have the part about human women seem to want to be with these guys and to have babies with them. We don't have a mention if some of these were females that may be mixed and then they bore children. But there's something interesting. A lot of people on the internet, when the Nephilim come up, they talk about evil. They talk about giants. I have some problems if you take the word giant literally. Again, kind of problematic if you have someone that's 15, 20 feet tall having relations with someone, I don't know, who's 5.5 feet tall, if humans would be the same size now as they were then. I think most people can realize it would be really difficult not only to conceive a child, but also the childbearing process would probably be pretty dangerous. It'd be like mixing an elephant with a chihuahua. So what are we talking about when we're talking about giants? Maybe we're talking about, like the Bible does say, these were men of renown. So obviously you had a mixture. There were some that were evil, some that were good. Some, renown is usually not associated with really nasty characters. So what if these angels were, and again, speculation. I know there's text and stuff that we could refer to that would actually support this, but what if these people were actually, people that were either from an older civilization, if we assume that Adam came long before this period, that this could have been a civilization that was technological, that was very advanced. They had to be. Well, they had to be because it actually, in the book of Jasher, it says it taught these people taught humans not just how to mix human and animal DNA and animal and animal and animal and plant DNA together, they also taught them metallurgy. Now, that's quite interesting if we consider that if we go by the standard historical narrative, metallurgy was not something brought in until relatively recently. And here you have the idea that before the flood, metallurgy was taught. Now, that was one thing that I think the Noah movie with Russell Crowe did get right. It didn't get it right enough. I didn't think that the people presented there really would have had the technology to do much with biotech. They looked like they were maybe at like a World War I era. And they didn't even have planes or anything. It just they had metal. They had welding and things like that. But I think they'd had to be a little bit more advanced than World War I era to be doing advanced biotechnology. And if we take a look, then, that they were these special people who were breeding into the human species, were teaching metallurgy, were teaching biotechnology, were practicing all of these things. I think the technology would have had to be very advanced. We are only now, as far as we know, we are only now getting to the point that we can do the things that were described here. Now, it didn't say anything about humans were having sex with animals, and they were making chimera or hybrids, like centaurs or pans, or I can't remember the one that's the lion slash dragon. But anyway, the thing is Griffin. That's right, Griffin. The thing is that they did. You would think that a very primitive, that's the way people look upon people that lived in the past, a primitive society in ancient Israel, writing some sort of what you could say is a creation myth, that they would write something in the respect that they used some sort of divine magic or something, and they were able to turn into animals and have sex, or create animals with some sort of magical method. No, there was something said that they taught men how to mix the animals together. Nothing really magical about it. No abracadabra. They were teaching them. So, now we have violence. Well, we have violence today. I could think of 3 different areas around the world, and I don't see Jesus coming back right now, but 3 different areas of the world that we could wind up with World War III. That, of course, is, well, Israel and Palestine are always, on the forefront of that one. Then you got the whole ISIS thing, and then you have the Ukraine. Okay? 100-year anniversary of World War I. Maybe we're getting ready for World War III. I don't know. But the thing is, we have a lot of violence today in the world. And the days of Noah, they had a lot of violence. But we don't see an immediate return of Jesus yet. So, can we just assume that the technology part is not here yet? We are only now starting to experiment with chimeras. There are labs around the world, and you can look this up for yourself. If you think that this is something from some conspiracy side or something like that, it's not. You look up animal-human DNA mixing. There are cows that have been given DNA from humans that produce human milk. Okay? They produce human milk. There are experiments underway to create pigs that you could take their organs and use in humans, since for some strange reason pigs are very close to humans when it comes to DNA. Makes you wonder what was going on back in Noah's day in that regards, huh? Because I remember there was a really prominent geneticist who actually said that the only explanation for this was at some point a chimpanzee must have had sex with a pig for this to occur. And for some strange reason, a lot of the major religions say that you're not supposed to eat pigs. Maybe something weird about that people have not considered. So anyway, but let's get back to this main point. Look up goats and spiders. Yeah, in Utah, they have goats that they've replaced the genes for their mammary production with spider, so that they produce milk that when you dry it, it's spider silk that they can use for bulletproof vest and for suturing. Biodegradable, works really well. And there's also experiments done on creating embryos. They're not supposed to take them to term, but embryos that are part rabbit and part human. Now, these are things that are reported. You look it up yourself if you don't believe me. These things are being done in labs today. Okay? We've come a long ways since when Stalin had approved experiments with mixing human and gorilla and chimpanzee and seeing if that would work. Okay? Very primitive in that point. Stalin finally shut it down just as there had been some Russian women volunteering to get impregnated. Before they were down, I think, someplace in Africa, and they were using, they were paying some African women to have the gorilla sperm placed in them to see if it would create babies, and then use that as a way of saying, see, evolution worked. The humans and apes are actually part of the same species. Didn't work. And for some strange reason, Stalin decided to get rid of the experiment and exile the biologist that was working on these things. But we've come a long way since then. We can do lots of stuff. And look at your food you're eating today. Your tomato might be part octopus. Look it up. There's a lot of the food that you're eating. If you're in the United States, I mean, not necessarily in Europe and Russia and some other countries, but if you're in the United States, you're eating food that is not what God put on the shelf, okay? It's mixed. And it's just going to continue going. We're going to continue seeing more and more of the genetic mixing. And, in nature, you don't see a carrot have relations with a chicken. Okay? It just does not happen. But in the lab, yes, it does. You can take genes from a carrot and put them into a chicken or vice versa and create a species that might be a chicken that has a certain protein in it or a carrot that has a certain protein. So we're going at it full force right now. And I think we see these stories that soon women and women will be able to have kids together. 2 women won't have to rely on sperm donation from a man. 2 men will be able to have a child together. The parents already we've had situations where there's been babies born where they have some of the DNA from a different person than their parents. So therefore, they technically have 3 parents. But this is a rapidly changing technology, rapidly advancing, and it's going to get more and more and more advanced. So how do we know, for instance, that the so-called angels of God, that the Nephilim came from, the mixtures, were not actually humans that were created in the lab and made to where they were perfect? How do we know that some of the DNA, how do we know that everyone didn't take advantage of some of this stuff? The lifespans of people during this period. Why is it, if God was the one that gave them these really long lifespans, did God tell Noah, it's in the Bible, humans are supposed to live 125 years? Noah at the time, I think, was 600 when he got that information. He lived 300 years after the flood. Methuselah lived longer than that. So the thing is, was this from God or was it something that was developed? And again, 20 years ago, people would have laughed at you if you talked about human beings living these really long lifespans. Even in our science fiction today, people live normal lifespans. It's one problem I had with the Noah movie too. They had Noah being some hippie type guy, and it looked like the lifespans of people were about what they are today. I was anxious to see how they would present lifespan. Well, they kind of made it look like people live the same lifespans as today. So, Anthony Hopkins playing Methuselah, it would have been more fun if he would have looked the same age as Noah, even though he was hundreds of years older, and they played around with that, but they didn't. But the thing is, the thing we find in the book of Jasher was that there was a lot, at least what it says was there was a lot of crop failures and destitution, things like that taking place during this period. How are you sure the seeds you would buy at the store if you want to grow your own garden, unless they're heirloom seeds, are going to actually produce? Nowadays, a lot of seeds are made with what they call terminator genes, I think, where the plant will grow one cycle, but then its seeds will not grow afterwards. And this is so that whatever company developed them will be able to continue selling these seeds. So what if this is what they were doing in those days and it just went wrong? And you wound up with massive crop failures and hunger and that sort of thing. But if these if these things that are, if these Nephilim were actually humans that may have been genetically advanced humans, and then they were mixing with humans, and that would be popular. You think about what would happen if you had some athlete, you bred some athletes today that had, and a woman knew that if they had children with these athletes, they would be absolutely perfect children, and they would be strong and healthy and free of disease and intelligent and so forth. Maybe that's what was going on then. Okay? Maybe that's why women just seem to be going, whoa, because that's the way it sounds in all these books, Enoch, Jasher, and so forth. So anyway, one last thing. You're probably thinking, well, okay, lost there for just 1 second. The thing is, in closing, just think what it would look like if our society ended and our history had to be abbreviated and you had to describe things after, let's say, our technology advances well beyond what it is today, but that the people that were the scribes generation after generation after generation had to edit and edit and edit and edit. You might get some of our advanced things today, maybe the space shuttle, someone trying to describe the space shuttle. It would start taking on a angelic form. It would start being described that way. I think maybe this is what happened in this era. You probably had a very scientific era, a very advanced era. Noah was not some simple farmer. He probably was from the upper class and had a really good education, goes out, buys up some land, starts to build the boat. I think that's much more plausible than a lot of times, in the movie, God grew a forest for him really fast. In a lot of other movies about Noah, he just goes out and starts chopping trees down. Don't think it happened that way. At least it would make more sense if it was the way that I've been talking about, the idea that you could wind up with a advanced civilization, then someone's warned about an impending crisis based on their misuse of technology. Well, anyway, that's some food for thought there. And I hope you enjoy it. Think about it. Do some research about it. You might find some interesting things out there. Anyway, this is Michael Cross signing off for Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
For more news, visit pigmynews.com.
This is Ozzy's Cape